But suffice it to say, the numbers are expanding, increasing, and we need to make sure that we are clear with that, with our customer base. And that in terms of the market space, now, I will say this, that this statistic is accurate, 100% worldwide. What we will see in the US is 50-50. I think anybody who has gone out and talked to anybody about the mobility space sees that you walk into a company and they are either everybody, no problems, or, well, we started out with Apple and now we're allowing other devices. There's kind of the two ways you'll see it. And at the end of the day, a lot of our customers are about 50-50. Some of them are very much more towards Apple and iPhone use, but there's always going to be a small percentage of Android devices. Outside of the US, that statistic is very different. So if you're dealing with a multinational for any reason, you will hear, oh, everybody is Android down in Latin America, but up here they're all iPhone. Just a statistic to understand so that when you're communicating with the customer, that you understand where their base is and where their head is at. And that in terms of what the customers are doing with their devices, and what their systems look like and what the overall looks like with customers. If you're not familiar with where we were a couple of years ago with BlackBerry, big companies started out buying BlackBerry devices. That's all they had, just BlackBerry devices. They had thousands and thousands of BlackBerry devices, and they owned them. And then at some point they figured out, but if my people will pay for it themselves, why am I paying for it? Makes much more sense. I'll let them buy the devices. Because those devices aren't really doing much for work, they're just sending an email every once in a while. I don't need to worry about security, I don't need to worry about anything else, because BlackBerry was always secure, so iPhone has to be as well, and Google has to be as well. I'll let other people bring whatever they want. Some people did, some people didn't. Now we're at a point that it's time to bring in devices. It's time to allow people to bring in devices on their own, and we're going to add them to our program. We're going to add them via an MDM, we're going to add them via something else. So we have a new program within every company that you'll talk to, or just about every company, where they have BYOD, they have the ability to bring your own devices, and hopefully we'll have to figure out a way to secure them. Although I will tell you, we're still at the leading edge on sales on that, how to secure a device. A lot of companies will say, I have an MDM, I'm secure. And then it is our job to explain, no, that's not quite security, that's control, not security.
One other point on BYOD is, it used to be a pretty big question in the organization. Do you allow BYOD? That would be a leading sales question. Try to understand their environment. Anybody that says they don't have a BYOD policy, they're probably just ignoring the mobile users that are in their community. They're just not accepting that it's a formal policy to bring these devices in, which is another way of saying they don't have any control or thought of control of those devices. So the terminology BYOD is still kind of popular in terms of a buzzword. But in practicality, you either have BYOD or you don't, and most people have corporate-owned devices, some small population, and then they don't know about the rest of the mobile users that are in the population. They're not BYOD in a formal policy. So BYOD you can think of as just a policy. It's not something that's actually exists anymore. It's becoming more of a unicorn that's kind of out there, because folks are just refusing to make policy around it, and if they kind of put their head in the sand like an ostrich, so they don't have to come up with anything associated with security that's associated with it. So just don't get caught in, do you have BYOD, or why don't you have BYOD, or here's how to enable BYOD. Those buzzwords are starting to kind of fall off the map, and it's just accepted that everybody's bringing their mobile device to work, and there is a means to get your email, or there's not a means to get email, there's a means to the network, or there's not a means. But very few actually have a written policy any longer.
I just want to fix my presentation here real quick, because for some reason it is broken on the back end. It's going to cause a problem in just a minute. My apologies. Because it's going to go to another screen, and then it's going to fail. There it is.
Is that you riding a motorcycle really fast?
No, unfortunately it is not. I'm a little bit of a Ducati freak, but that one's not mine. It's just the standard Microsoft background. I was really surprised. Microsoft actually has a Ducati background as part of the theme. So, in terms of the BYOD market, honestly, at the end of the day, like I said before, in the U.S. it's about 50-50. BYOD outside of the U.S. very much into Android. People really enjoy Android outside of the U.S. I think in the U.S. we had a very strong Apple lead. right off the bat, and that Apple Store is being very slow to adapt foreign languages, slowed them down greatly, whereas Google set up all kinds of Google stores all over the world that were dedicated. You had Google Russia, you had Google Mexico, you had Google China, you had Google Asia, Europe, whatever. You had all these different Google stores who were really dedicated to the individual countries, and they kind of took a first grasp. Whereas in the US, like I said, Apple took over the market day zero. They really took it over and own it. So what we see in terms of BYOD markets is kind of interesting in the US, that Apple is already there. We already have Apple, and people are adding on Android, trying to figure out, how do I add on Android? We actually talked to somebody the other day that uses Jamf as their control on Apple devices. But they're struggling because it only works on Apple devices, and it will never work on anything else. So how do they deal with that situation? And that's something that we need to be able to consult with them on. How do you go from this to this? You know, in terms of what you guys can do, if you're working with AirWatch, Mobileye, or whatever, there are cases where we can go in and say, well, we're gonna bring in both an MDM and a security product, and make sure it's all tied together.
So one other part of that trend is Android devices are much cheaper than Apple, right? So if you have a population of 100 or 200, maybe the difference between iOS and Android is not so great, but when you start talking about 10,000 devices or 20,000 devices, most folks are going directly to Android based on cost, right? And they're ignoring the security and the manageability components that Apple was kind of famous for. So something just to watch out. People are definitely moving from Apple to Android. There's very specific parts that are staying iOS, but the mass market is going to be Android.
Yeah, absolutely, and there is no negotiating with Apple. You say, I want to pay $20 less for this device if I buy 100,000, they look at you and go, that's nice. And that's the only response you're going to get from Apple. You say that to the Android providers, and they're like, let's see what we can do. So very much a key differentiator between the two. But like I said, it's moving towards Android in that space. So go for the little video. Actually, sound is not, is it? Oh yeah, you're right.
Unless you have the same volumes for everything.
It is, sorry, it is actually an online video, so give me 1 second, I'll get us connected to the Wi-Fi.
Are you touching things, James?
Oh, yeah.
I'll pay for the fumigation.
Don't touch it.
So when you're establishing the need, you're really just trying to understand the environment that you're working within. So these are some of the questions you look for, BYOD. You're looking for, do they have an MDM? You're looking for what types of devices that they have. So kind of any part of any good sales call is to try to determine the landscape that you're working within. And then you can start to tailor what's coming next, which will be about the product pitch that's out there. Check moving headset.
Absolutely. So we know it's working now. Let's try this. Didn't realize it was YouTube connected into this. Oh, of course.
We depend on
Yes,
mobile
I know,
devices.
I know. We'll make it work in just a second. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. All right. My apologies. I will. It's a really cool video too, but it's just on the wrong screen, and if I do this, it fails the other screen. I will have to go and get this fixed at some point. But for right now, we'll make it work.
What do you have any questions? So we've covered so far. I know we're just kind of scratching the surface on the need, but
Do you anticipate Android to increase their security around the apps that are out there more aligned with Apple? Their within?
I don't, and Scott could tell you in much more detail than I'm gonna tell you, but in general, Apple is very focused on the system around apps. So they keep that area of the phone very, very secure. Android, by choice, is very wide open. And because they have made the choice to be wide open, they cannot be more security conscious. It's kind of like a firewall, you go back to those now, you either allow it or you block it. So it's a very similar type scenario of the phones. So it's basically a fundamental choice that Android is making to be open versus Apple being much more closed. It doesn't make one necessarily more secure or less. They're both very vulnerable to many different type of attacks, but the type of attacks are different between the two. Then Scott will talk about some of those.
Let's see if this works.
We
Hey!
depend on mobile devices to keep our world connected. We trust them with our most personal information and most sensitive work. Our need for always-on data puts us at risk now more than ever before. Advanced cybercrimes aren't science fiction. They're real and have real consequences. Checkpoint is at the forefront of mobile security, ensuring devices and data everywhere remain safe. We don't just build cutting-edge technology, we stand behind it. With the largest team of elite researchers and security engineers in the industry who have the experience to keep you one step ahead of mobile threats. Over the last year, Checkpoint researchers uncovered critical vulnerabilities like Sidestepper, which exposed a flaw in enterprise iOS devices that let hackers push malware to employees' iPhones. And QuadRooter, a set of vulnerabilities on 1 billion Android devices that could be used to hack devices without users ever knowing. Checkpoint researchers discovered sophisticated mobile malware campaigns too, like Hummingbad, hunting down a gang of cybercriminals in China that controlled 10 million devices globally, and Gooligan, which breached 1.3 million Google accounts, giving attackers complete access to users' Gmail, Google Play, photos, documents, and G Suite data. You can trust Checkpoint.